Hello, I'm Phill Swagel, Director of the Congressional Budget Office. On April 28th, I gave a briefing to the House Budget Committee about the near-term economic and budgetary outlook. In this presentation, I will discuss the same material as I did for the committee's members and refer to the 6 slides that were distributed for that briefing. I'll focus first on the economy and labor market and then turn to the fiscal situation. Job losses over the past few weeks have been staggering. More than 24 million new unemployment insurance claims have been reported since mid-March, including more than 4 million claims reported last week. In the first slide, you can see that we project the unemployment rate in the second and third quarters of 2020 to average close to 15%, up from less than 4% in the first quarter. That rate is higher than at any point since the early 1930s. We expect the unemployment rate to remain elevated. By the end of 2021, it would still be more than 9%. In the second slide, you can see both that the number of unemployed people is skyrocketing and that millions of people are leaving the labor force. In total, 28 million fewer people are projected to be employed in the third quarter of this year than we forecast in January, a reduction of 18%. This sharp downturn in economic activity will have severe immediate effects on many families and communities. Negative effects will be especially severe for lower income households, which as a whole had experienced accelerated economic gains in recent years. Moreover, both the reduction in the number of people employed in 2020 and the persistence of high unemployment through 2021 will have significant and potentially long-lasting effects on the people most directly affected. Some of those who are unemployed will struggle to find a new job. For those who lose their jobs and eventually do find new employment, the decline in earnings may persist for many years. In addition, college graduates and others who enter the labor market in a weak economy tend to have substantially lower earnings initially than those who enter when economic conditions are stronger. The upshot is that effects of downturns are felt for years into the future. In the third slide, you can see that this looks to be a downturn of historic proportions. We estimate that real GDP will contract by 11.8% in the second quarter of this year, equal to a decline at an annual rate of nearly 40%. We do expect economic activity to increase in the second half of the year, driven by a rebound in consumer spending that will outweigh further declines in business investment. Still, we expect that real GDP in the fourth quarter of 2020 will be 5.6% lower than it was in the fourth quarter of 2019. The fourth slide shows the sharp difference between our GDP forecast in January, before the pandemic began to affect the US economy, and our GDP forecast now. Even with a continued recovery in 2021, real GDP at the end of 2021 would still be more than 6% below what we forecast in January. The projections that I am describing today incorporate information available as of Thursday, April 23rd, including the policies that the Congress enacted to support the economy. We will provide an assessment of the effects of those policies on the economy when we produce a new baseline over the summer. These projections are highly uncertain. One source of uncertainty is the course of the pandemic. CBO's projections incorporate an expectation that the current extent of social distancing across the country will continue, on average and with regional variation, through June. And our projections reflect the prospect of social distancing, though to a lesser extent, through the first half of 2021. Developments that change the duration or degree of social distancing would lead to larger or smaller economic impacts. Turning now to the budget. CBO has made a preliminary assessment of deficits and debt in fiscal years 2020 and 2021. For that assessment, we have assumed that laws currently in place remain generally unchanged and that no significant additional emergency funding is provided. Let me note also that this is not a new baseline projection, which would require much more detailed analysis and would span a much longer time period. We will provide that later this year, as well as a comprehensive analysis of all of the legislation recently enacted in response to the pandemic. As you can see in the fifth slide, we project a federal deficit of roughly $3.7 trillion in fiscal year 2020, which runs through the end of this September, and $2.1 trillion in 2021. Those deficits compare with CBO's pre-virus projection of just over $1 trillion in each of those years. The deficit in fiscal year 2020 would equal 17.9% of GDP, the largest percentage since 1945. In 2021, the deficit would equal 9.8% of GDP, about what it was in fiscal year 2009. The larger deficits result from sharply lower revenues and substantially higher non-interest spending, which reflect both economic developments and legislative actions. The lower revenues and higher spending will be offset to a small degree by the effects of lower interest rates on the government's interest costs. The increases in federal deficits, combined with the expected weakness in economic output, will cause federal debt held by the public to increase. In the sixth and last slide, we show that debt held by the public would equal 101% of GDP at the end of fiscal year 2020, a sharp increase from 79% at the end of fiscal year 2019. And debt would grow to 108% of GDP by the end of 2021, the highest percentage in US history. Debt relative to GDP is projected to be 20 percentage points higher at the end of fiscal year 2020 and 26 percentage points higher at the end of 2021 than in CBO's March baseline projections. That concludes my presentation. If you'd like more information about CBO's work related to the pandemic, look under topics on our website and click on COVID-19. Thank you very much.